Hey guys, today we're going to be migrating away from the individual keyframes and using an armature, which will give us greater control over how many animations we add, as well as increasing the complexity of our animations. If you're just joining us, pause the video here and check out the previous section so that you can get caught up, then resume this section when you're ready. For everybody else, let's get started. What I want to do now is create a slightly more advanced animation using Blender, but it's going to give me greater control within the game engine and simplify the event datasheet as well. What I want to do is come back to frame 1, and I want to hit 1 on my numpad for front orthographic view. If you don't have a numpad, you can use the gizmo and click that -Y. It's going to do the same thing. I'm also going to do a little bit of housekeeping before I go too far. I want to come to my droid collection, re-enable that for view and render just in case you have it disabled. I'm not going to use the droid low, and if you have 2 copies, you can make a copy of your Blender file before you make any destructive changes in your current file. So I'm going to go ahead and move my droid high down to my droid animation, get rid of this separate collection, and I want to rename this one as droid no damage instead of droid high because I'm only using the 1 version. Now I'm going to bulk rename all of my damage parts, and you can select all of them and then hit Control F2, and I do want this find and replace, and what I want to replace is the underscore high. I'm going to replace that with underscore damage. Notice that it's only set to 8 objects, not 9. There's 9 total in this collection, so go ahead and hit OK on that. So once we have all of this, select our last objects. We have all objects selected. Let's go ahead and just make sure that we have that scale applied. So you're going to hit Control A to make sure that that is applied. If you hit the N key, notice that the scale, everything is set to 1. That's going to ensure that we don't run into unexpected complications later when we're doing our animation. Let's go ahead and add an armature. Now what I want to do is press Shift and A. I want an armature and single bone. Notice that we can't really see it too well, so we're going to come to our object properties, and then down here in viewport display, we want to tick this in front. We can see it from any direction. Press F2. Let's rename this as droid animation. Now we can tab into edit mode, select this first bone, press F2 again, and notice that it's renamed as bone, and that's because what we just did in object mode is rename the entire armature, and what we're doing now in edit mode is renaming the individual bones. So I want to call this first bone root, and I can also scale this way down, GZ, and move that down. This is why I want it to be in front orthographic view, so I could line my objects up. Press Shift and D. Let's go ahead and duplicate this, and notice I can move it all over. Press Z. Let's go ahead and lock this to the Z axis and move it straight up. Now that's done, we can rename this one as droid no damage. Now I'm going to press Shift and D, Z, and move this down. You can have them overlap. It doesn't matter because they're not going to be connected. Otherwise, if you want to see them clearly, just keep them so that they're offset. Now let's go ahead and rename this one as droid damage. And I want to add the word parent this time. I want to create a parent bone for the damage parts, which will control all of the damage parts together, and then the root bone will control all of the droid parts together. Shift and D, Z, let's move this down, and I'm going to scale this a bit more. For this first one, we want to get rid of the numbers and the word parent. Okay, so just leave that like that. Now I'm going to take a second before I create any more bones and create some connections. Select the droid no damage bone, shift select the root bone, Control P and keep offset. Select just the droid damage bone, and then shift select the root bone, Control P and keep offset. Select the damaged child, shift select the damaged parent, Control P and keep offset. Now if we move this one, notice that it's parented to this damage bone and not the root bone, but the parent bone is connected to both bones. So now we want 8 bones total. We're going to press Shift and D and then X, and we can just move this over. If we go into the naming convention, notice that we have a .1, and if you see what I'm doing here, all of this lines up. So we have to create 6 more child bones. So pause the video, create those 6 bones. I'll meet you back here in a second. So click on this last one. Let's make sure that the numbers are .007. That matches over here, and that's going to be important a few moments from now. Let's tab out of edit mode. Let's drag our droid into our droid animation collection. Now let's select everything. Now let's press Control and A, and let's make sure that we have that scale set, and that's going to be important when we animate things. So now that's done. Click the armature and then come up here to pose mode. Within this tree here, let's click on the droid no damage, and we want to click on this top bone, which was our droid no damage. Hit Control and P and then parent that to bone. To make sure that that worked, press G and X and just move that over. And that gets that out of the way, as well as confirming that we have that bone parented. Now let's start from the bottom, just because it's going to be a little bit easier. I want to click on this cell ending 007, and then I want to click on the bone that corresponded to the 007, and you can tell that from the naming convention up here. So I want to click on the bone that was labeled 007 and then Control P and parent that to the bone. GX, let's get that out of the way. Do the same thing for 6, and then I'm going to click on the bone that corresponds to that. Control P, parent that to the bone. GX, get that out of the way. And I'm going to do this for each one. Go ahead and pause the video and parent each of your cells to the corresponding bone, and I'll meet you back here in a second. Okay, that's done, but now our armature is a mess. Don't fear, you can press A, Alt-R, Alt-G. That's going to bring everything right back. So notice if I use the root bone, that moves everything. If I click on the parent and move that, that's going to move all of my damaged parts together. And if I click on this top bone, that's going to move only the droid. While this does seem a little bit more advanced, it does drastically reduce our complications within the game engine. Switch back to object mode for a moment, and let's come over here to the animation tab. Window arrangement, I think, is personal preference, so I'm going to switch some windows around, but if you don't like it, you can put them in any order that you like. I'm going to go ahead and close this area here because I don't need the graph editor for the moment. I am going to bring down the timeline. I'm going to move over the dope sheet, and I don't need a whole lot of room to see my object. I can move it around accordingly. I'm going to switch from the dope sheet and change that to action editor at the top here, and then I'm going to look for the little plus sign when I get between 2 windows, and I'm going to drag this up, and now let's use the drop down, and I want this non-linear animation. These actions that you see here, we created the last time, and we likely will not continue to use those. If you go down the armature path, you're not going to want the individual animations because it makes it harder to export. So what I want to do now is think about my first animation, and if you recall from what we did in the series, we had an idle animation which we animated using gDevelop, but it's just as easy to create an idle animation using the armature. Next, what I want to do is make it a little bit easier when we're animating to make sure that we don't accidentally click the wrong bone. So what you can do, make sure that you're in pose mode, come up here, click this top bone, and if we come to the viewport display of the bone properties, if we scroll down here, we have the choice of creating some custom colors. What I want to do is go ahead and set this top one to green. You can choose any color that you like. This is just an example of how you can do it to make sure that you're not accidentally clicking the wrong bone. For the damage bones, we can box select, making sure that we have all of those bones that we want. Hit the default colors, and this one's going to be slightly different because you can only color one object at a time unless you hit the Alt key. And then if you hit that Alt key as you're clicking the color, it's going to colorize all of those bones. For the root bone, we can give that its separate color as well. And then if you find it confusing to have the parent and all of the child damage bones to be the same color, you can set this one to a different color as well. Next, what I want to do is create some bone groups that's going to make it easier for animation later. So click on the data properties icon, which looks like a little running man. Notice that we already have one group here. It's defaulting to all of the bones. You can keep that. I'm going to get rid of it. So you just click that minus to remove it. And I'm going to create a new group by clicking the plus. I'm going to call this droid no damage. And now select this top bone. Make sure that that group is selected and then click assign. Notice the little dot coming in indicating that there's something in there. Let's go ahead and create a second group, and this one I'm going to call droid damage. Make sure that you click away so that you don't accidentally have stray bones selected. Now let's box select, and we're going to select all of the damage bones, including the parent, and we want to click assign on that. We don't need to put the root bone in a group unless you want to. It's personal preference. But what this enables us to do is click on either of these, hit select, and then we can move just those bones. So now if I click on droid damage, select, and then G, we move those individual bones without having to go and box select and make sure that we have the correct ones each time. If you plan on creating all of your animations with the armature and getting rid of the previously created keyframes, what you can do is select everything, make sure that you're in object mode here, then come down to your timeline. You can press A and then the delete key, and that gets rid of those two keyframes for all of the cells because everything is selected. Now what you can do is right-click anywhere in the nonlinear animation and remove the empty animation data. That gives us a clean slate to start our armature animations. Once that's done, you just need to go back into pose mode. We're going to go ahead and animate an idle animation. So in our top panel here, which is our dope sheet action editor, let's click on new. We're going to call this idle. For the idle animation, we don't need to see any of the damage parts, so let's go ahead and click on the parent. We only need to animate the parent, and all of the child bones will do the same action. So in this case, frame 0, let's go ahead and hit S and 0, and notice that immediately hides everything. It just sets the scale to 0, which is why we can't see it. Next, what we want to do is animate our non-damaged droid. So what we're going to do is click that green bone on my screen. Yours may be different. Don't forget that you can also come to the collection and select it that way. So for this one, I'm just going to click it. I want to set a starting keyframe because nothing has moved. Our auto keyframe is not going to work for us in this case. Now I'm going to come out to frame 25 and I want to press RZ90, and that's going to give me some rotation. Come out to frame 50 and then RZ90 again, and we're going to repeat this until we have a full circle. Come out to frame 75, RZ90, and then frame 100, RZ90. Now if we change our end frame to 100 and click play on this, you'll see that we have a full rotation. I want to hover over the timeline, hit the T key, and then set the keyframes to linear, which gives us a consistent rotation. If this rotation is a little bit fast, you could always slow it down in the game engine, or you could adjust the timeline here. That is our idle animation, which when we get back to gDevelop, we can go ahead and remove those events from the event sheet because we're going to be importing those animations with the model. Before we close Blender, let's go ahead and make sure that we click push down. What you see is that it comes down here to our non-linear animation sheet now, and this is going to be a permanent animation for our model. Let's go ahead and do a new animation. We can do our explosion now, and for that, what we can do is add a new action. We're going to call this explosion, and then come back to frame 0. For explosion, what I want to do is click on the non-damaged bone screen on my screen. It may be different on yours. Hit S and 0. Let's go ahead and scale that right down so that we hide that bone. Now I want to bring my damaged bones back. So what I want to do is click away and then click on my damage collection, then hit select, Alt S. That's going to bring all of those damaged bones right back. And all of this is happening, this switch is happening seamlessly on frame 0 so that we can't see it. We know it's there because we're doing it, but the player would not see it. Now I'm going to come out to frame 15 and I'm going to move some of these objects around. First thing I'm going to do is click away so that nothing is selected. Pick any of the bones, make sure that you're in pose mode, and then just use the G and R to move and rotate. G and R. If you recall, our animation was pretty basic, so I'm not going to do too much here because I want it to be a little bit similar. And depending on where your bones are, determines which way you want to rotate. And last one. Okay, so that's pretty basic. It's similar to what we had the last time, and it's also 15 frames. So now if we hit play, we can see that animation. If you want to see it a little bit slower, maybe you need to make adjustments to some of your bones, you can just manually move through the timeline. So now we have this done. We're going to click on push down, and that will push this animation down. We can come back to frame 0. I personally like to keep a rest pose or a T pose, especially for complicated rigs like this where we're hiding and showing a lot of bones, because for the export you want to have all of the bones selected. It's a quirky little thing with GLTF. So for the rest, what I want to do is in pose mode, hit A, Alt R, Alt G, Alt S, and set that keyframe for all of those bones. We're going to click on push down, and then that is it for my rest pose. If you still have your idle track starred, go ahead and remove that so that your 3 animations are there. You could continue to animate. You could have 15 or more before you move on to the next step. It's going to be personal preference. If you're happy and ready to export, let's head back over to the Layout tab. Notice that we're in object mode on this tab, which is fine. Now what I want to do is go ahead and box select everything, but what we notice is that we miss a few things in the collection. We do want to have everything selected when we do our export. So what I like to do personally is I just start at the collection, making sure that everything is in there, and then you shift and select. Notice now that we have everything selected. From there, you're just going to come up to File and Export, select GLTF, then starting from the bottom, we want to expand on the animation tab, and I don't want to make any changes there. I like the way the default looks. For your data tab, expand mesh, and let's make sure we apply any modifiers in case we forgot. For the include, I like to tick the selected, rendered, and active collection. That'll add some nested, but I still like to do it manually as well. From here, you can go ahead and click on Export GLTF. Before I even try my models in a game engine, I like to test it just in a GLTF viewer. If you Google GLTF viewer, it'll come right up, but I'll put a link to the URL in the description below. So all you have to do here is just drag your file in, and then we can see it right away. Our animation comes in. I'm going to pause that one for a second. We have our idle animation. That's looking good. You can zoom in and out, move that, and then our rest pose, which does nothing, and then our explosion. And the key here is just making sure that you don't have any stray objects that you weren't aware of, and that all of the animations start in the same place. Back in gDevelop, I want to double click on the droid, and let's navigate to where we save that file. Next, we can click on Scan for Missing Animations, and we see that our 3 new animations will come in. I'm going to move the idle to the top and tick this loop option, and then leave the rest as default for now. Click Apply on that. I also want to move these 2 yellow boxes so I don't automatically create a droid, and I'm going to drag my test droid in. Now let's head over to the event sheet. So the first thing we want to do is come down here to the enemy animation, and where we had to manually make this turnaround on the Z, we can comment this out by pressing the D shortcut. I'm going to scroll down to the shoot section, And so we're not destructive. Let's go ahead and duplicate this. We can copy and paste this. Hit the D key, which is a shortcut to comment out this whole line. We know that we don't need to create an object for the droid hit, and because we're not creating that object, we also don't need to add in the rotations. We do want to change the animation, so we can leave that. Let's get rid of these first 4 lines. I do want to change the animation, but we'll have to rename this back to droid, and the idle animation name was explosion and not hit, so we can just select that from the drop-down. Now where it says create the blue explosion, we do want to rename this so it's not droid hit and it's just droid. Okay, so we'll create that at the droid center, and same thing over here, and same thing down here for the Z. So anywhere you see the words droid hit, basically we're just renaming that to droid. So I want to swap out these 2 as well, because we're not going to delete the droid hit anymore. That no longer exists in our scene, and I just want to drag this down. That's going to give that a slight delay so that we see the explosion, we see the blue animation, and then it deletes the droid. And we also want to change this over here, renaming this so that it's not the droid hit any longer. It's going to be droid, so when the animation of droid hits, let's go ahead and delete that. Now we can go ahead and test this. And I set the droid pretty far, giving us a chance to get set up. And then walking towards the droid, we shoot it, it explodes, we see the blue explosion, and then it deletes. So all of that is working very much as expected. Now if we continue on, we know that we have other droids that were automatically created because of those yellow boxes, and these will all do the same thing. If you like the way that is working, you can go ahead and get rid of that entire event. And we'll also want to scroll back up to the enemy animation and delete this line here as well, freeing up one more event from our event sheet. Let's head back to our scene tab. We can move our test droid back outside the walls. We can move our yellow boxes back in. These will automatically create some new droids for us. And a quick play test will confirm that those are working as expected. That's going to do it for this segment. I hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about the ins and outs of animation options. Don't forget to click the like and subscribe, which really supports my channel and is greatly appreciated. Let me know in the comments below how you made out and what you might like to see in future segments. I look forward to reading all of your comments. I hope this helped, and we'll see you soon.